finish the ends of our zipper so that we can put the zipper into the large pocket. And it doesn't really matter what length of zipper you start with, as I said when talking about materials, because we're going to be sewing little scraps of fabric to either end and effectively shortening the zipper to the exact length that we want. So the way that we start this is to go to the end of the zipper that has the crimp on it. And we're going to take a square of fabric, right sides together, and place it, so it's covering the crimp. And then from the sort of underside of the zipper, we want to sew this together with the right side of the fabric to the right side of the zipper. And you want to sew from the underside so that you can sew just inside of where the crimp is on the bottom of the zipper, so you can really clearly see where that is and that you don't hit that with your needle, because it is metal. You can sew through a plastic zipper with just a normal needle and normal presser foot if you sew slowly. So you want to just make sure that you don't hit the metal part, because you clearly can't sew through metal. So what we're going to do is, what that will look like is, here we have a zipper in which I have done that, where you can see this line of stitching, and I'm starting with a roughly 2 by 2 inch square of fabric. And it doesn't really matter exactly what your seam allowance is on this part. The square of fabric is larger than we need to be, and we'll trim it down after we have the sewing all assembled. So you can see I have this line of stitching, and it's just on the inside of the metal crimp that you can see, so I'm sure I didn't hit it. And again, I sewed this on from this direction so that I can see where the crimp is, and I've got the right side of the fabric against the right side of the zipper. So when we flip this over, what we can do then is, so when we fold this back, it looks like we have this nice finished end on our zipper. And I actually don't put pins in to sew this little bit of seam, because I feel like it's small enough I can just hold it in place with my hand, and since I'm not lining up anything exactly because I've cut this fabric bigger than I need, I feel like the pins just kind of get in the way and can actually kind of bunch things up, because the zipper tape is pretty heavy and doesn't have a lot of give. But it's up to you. You can put a couple pins in if that's more comfortable for you. You can pin the fabric on like this when you sew, so that you are then sewing this seam. And then when we have it finished, this is just going to fold back, and so the end of the zipper is nice and finished. You don't want to press this. You never want to get your iron to touch the zipper. That's a problem because it can melt and warp your zipper, so the zipper won't open properly. So this is just a small enough piece that if I find I can just finger press it. And since I'm working with here this 100% cotton, it's actually a quilting cotton, it holds this finger press really nicely. It's one reason that it's nice to use like a quilting cotton for this lining. If you're using a lining fabric that doesn't hold a finger press very well, you can really carefully get in there with an iron. And to do that, what you would want to do is just bring the iron in, coming in from the side, but don't get it closer to the zipper than that. You can, and then bring it in from this side, and again, making sure that you're not ever actually going to be touching the zipper with your iron, because you do not want to melt the zipper. and you know, if you accidentally do, you may not even see that you have melted the zipper. It may not look any different, but we're just, you know, zippers are pretty delicate operations, and warping those interlocking coils just the tiniest bit can make it so that the zipper won't zip well. So now that we have this end sewn on, we want to measure out the proper length and sew another square of fabric to the other end. So the first thing to remember is that we do not want to, you know, if we just went and sewed this square on now, we would have a really pretty piece of zipper tape that would be completely non-functional because we would be sewing the zipper off on the other end, the zipper tab. So you actually need to remember to unzip the zipper far enough for when you sew this tab on, that the zipper is partially unzipped and the tab of the zipper is between the two seams that you're making. And that's really important if you ever want to be able to use this zipper. So what we're going to do is measure. We want the finished distance between the seams that we sew. So when we have this in here, we want this finished distance to be 7.5 inches. So it looks like I'm going to need to unzip the zipper more. And again, you can see that my zipper tape is way longer than necessary, and it's, you know, it's what I had in my stash. Picked it up at a thrift store probably. And that's fine and great. It's really easy to cut zippers down to size, especially if they are plastic coil zippers. So I'm going to measure, so we want this finished distance between the seam lines of these pretty tabs that we're putting on the end to be 7.5 inches. So if we're sewing a 1/4 inch seam, that means this far end of the fabric needs to be 7 3/4 inches away from the finished seam here. So I'm gonna put my tape here and measure that it's 7 3/4 inches. And then from there, I know this piece of fabric is gonna go in line with the end of this measuring tape. So it's 7 3/4 inches away, so that when I sew a 1/4 inch seam, it will be 7.5 inches away. To aid in alignment, I can actually go in and just make a chalk line where that end is. And because we have these fabric tabs on either end, can't really see my white chalk very well, so maybe I'll grab a different color. Because we are putting these zipper tabs on either end and then cutting them down to size, it's okay if you are not exactly 100% perfect. I mean, you want to get this close. I mean, you don't want to be off by inches by any means, but if you're off by a 1/4 inch, if this precision is a little hard for you, or you know, you make a small mistake, don't worry about it. Again, we are going to be cutting these ends down to size, so we will be trimming them a little bit. So this part of the sewing isn't like quilting in that it needs to be absolutely perfect. You're okay if you're off by, you know, a 1/4 inch or so. I mean, you don't want to be, you're just trying to ease your mind. So now we can go ahead and pin this fabric on. And when we pin the fabric on, we want to make sure that we are pinning it so that when we zip the zipper closed, the zipper tape is appropriately close. So you don't want to let it be wide open and then pin on and sew like that, because then you'll be left with this big gap in your zipper tape when you go ahead and sew it together. So holding the zipper tape close, if this is a struggle for you, you feel like you don't have enough hands, you can take a piece of tape, just lay a piece of tape down on one end, tape it to your table. Washi tape works great for this, or blue painter's tape, because it doesn't really stick to stuff. I'm just gonna use a little piece of masking tape because that's what I have on hand. But I'm not gonna stick it down very carefully so it pulls right up. But you know, and so that's gonna help me. You know, I can even put a piece on either side if you have a surface that you can tape to. There we go. So now it is taped together, so it's really easy, and I have this line marked 7 3/4. So I'm gonna match this scrap of fabric up with that. I am gonna put a couple pins in this situation. I'm using these large pins with these very large flower tops so that you can easily see what I'm pinning. You might want to use, you know, smaller, more delicate pins than this, but I just want you to be able to clearly see what I'm doing. So now I have this seam and I can lift things up. You can even, after you pull it up off your table, you know, keep that tape on until you're done sewing, because it's going to keep things from moving around. I'm going to go ahead and wrap the tape around so that my zipper is really held in place. And now I'm going to take this to my machine and sew this 1/4 inch seam. And again, so that with a 1/4 inch seam to here, that's 7.5 inches, because the end of the fabric is 7 3/4 inches away from this seam. Okay, so now that we have both ends, the tabs of both ends sewn onto our zipper, we are just about ready to go. The last things that we want to do now that we have these tabs sewn on is we can trim off the excess zipper length. We don't need that all flapping around. I wouldn't trim, don't trim right next to it, because you know, if your stitching comes undone, I mean, you can back stitch over this, make the seam a couple times to make it extra sturdy if you want. But you know, the last thing you want is for this to pull out and the zipper tab to come off the end, and then you have to put in a whole new zipper. So you know, I always leave you know, a little 1/2 inch or so. And then we can, you know, finger press this back, or even get in there really carefully with a sewing machine, an iron, and press it back. In the same way. You can see this is all ready to insert. So now to get this ready to sew in, we want to trim the fabric so it is the width of our zipper tape. And I'm just gonna, you know, it's such a short bit, I'm just gonna go ahead and eyeball it. If it makes you more comfortable, you can measure with a ruler, chalk it out. You know, if I was to do that, I could take a straight edge and run, you know, so I'm matching up this straight line with the edge of the zipper and running a line in chalk. So I can do that to make sure that I am cutting in a straight line if you don't feel comfortable eyeballing. And what we're going to do now is sew this into the rest of the pocket. So we want to take the pocket top and the pocket bottom of the large pocket, and we are going to sew them into, sew them together. So we want to, you know, we have extra length on either end of the zipper, and that's good, that's okay. So we're gonna center this seam into this, into the zipper, so that there'll be about a 1/2 inch overlap of fabric in between, from the fabric to the end of the stitching on the zipper. And then we can take this, get it pinned in, and go along, get this seam all pinned in with the top of the zipper tape lining up with the top of the pocket bottom. And then we can go ahead and go back to the machine and sew this seam, sewing through the decorative ends, along the zipper tape, and off to the other end. When sewing the zipper onto the pockets, I like to use a zipper foot. Your zipper foot, you know, may look different, but the purpose is in allowing the foot to get close to the tape of the zipper, so the seam can be pretty close to the tape of the zipper. It doesn't matter exactly what seam allowance you use here, because using the zipper tape, it can be kind of hard to get to know exactly what your seam allowance is. The only thing to know is that the closer you sew to the zipper tape, the less of the zipper tape that will show when we have the finished product. However, the zipper tape is visible in this, and intentionally so you don't need to worry about sewing up right next to that zipper tape. So I'm gonna go ahead and leave my needle in its normal position instead of moving it left like I might if I wanted to sew exactly along that zipper tape. And I'm just gonna go ahead and sew this seam. You can see I'm not really super concerned with what the distance is from my seam to the edge of my fabric or what my seam allowance is. What I'm keeping consistent is the distance from my zipper tape to my needle, and I'm doing that by running my zipper foot so that the edge of the foot is touching the edge of the teeth of the zipper. You can see on your zipper, if you look closely at a zipper tape, there are often little differences in weaving pattern across the zipper tape, and that is to help you stitch in a straight line when stitching along the zipper. You can follow the differences in weave. So that's something to bear in mind. Here, I know that I'm not going to be able to zip or to stitch past the actual zipper head or zipper toggle and maintain an accurate seam length. So I'm putting my needle down, I'm lifting my presser foot up, then I'm going to zip the unzip the zipper so that it gets out of the way, and then I can finish this last little bit of the zipper tape without worrying about that zipper toggle being in the way. So I have now sewn the bottom of the pocket onto the zipper tape. You can see the tape is still visible. It's going to be visible in our finished pocket, but with all finished edges, it's looking nice and pretty. And now I'm going to go ahead and stitch the top of the pocket to the right sides together with the top of the zipper tape, so that when we open it up, we have the top of the pocket just like that. So just like I sewed the fabric to the bottom of the zipper tape, I'm going to go ahead and pin and sew the fabric, the top of the pocket to the top of the zipper tape. And again, I'm going to stitch from the zipper side instead of the fabric side of the seam, because I think it makes it easier to get a nice accurate straight seam on the zipper. To finish preparing this assembled pocket for attaching to the rest of the lining, we want to go ahead and press the seam that we have sewn from the fabric onto the zipper. And when we do this, you want to be really, really careful that you're not pressing the zipper tape. You want to get your iron close to the zipper tape, but don't actually touch the zipper tape, because as I keep saying, that can melt your zipper tape and cause problems when trying to zip later on. So I'm being really careful. ironing up right next to it, but not actually on the zipper tape. Then we can trim this extra fabric that we have on the tabs off of the sides. Oops. And from there, we want to press the side, bottom, and other side in by 1/4 inch all the way around. And again, because this is just a pocket, it's okay if we're not totally perfect here, so I am just eyeballing this 1/4 inch. You can be more precise. Again, so here I'm finding I can't fold this in because my zipper tape is in the way, so it's okay to go and trim down my zipper tape a little bit more. I don't want the zipper tape, I don't want to cut it so it's, you know, touching the seam by any means, but, you know, leaving, that's a generous 1/4 inch should probably be plenty. So I can fold this side in by 1/4 inch and press my way all the way down. And then I'm going to continue and press all the way along the bottom and the other side, and then this pocket is ready to stitch onto the lining. For the zipper with the finished edge variation, we start sewing it just like we start sewing the other zipper. So I have the tab sewn onto both ends. They are 7.5 inches apart from seam to seam. I can go ahead and you know, trim off the excess zipper tape. And then what makes them different is now from the wrong side, I'm going to go ahead and place the fabric, right sides of the fabric to the wrong side of the zipper tape, lining up the edges of the fabric with the edge of the fabric on the underside. So I can do that on both ends. And then I want to flip everything back over, and on the right side I'm going to go ahead and sew right over the seam that I have already sewn on both ends, so that I have now a piece of fabric covering both sides. And the reason that I do this instead of sewing them both at the same time is that I just feel like you're less likely to accidentally hit the zipper tab. If you remember, on this side, you know, there's the metal zipper tab, and so if we know that the seam is exactly if we sew exactly over the seam that we already know is safe, because we could see when we were sewing, it makes it easier to not hit the zipper tab accidentally as you sew the second piece of fabric on where the zipper tab is hidden by that second piece of fabric. So I just feel like it's a little bit easier to be safe with your sewing, not make mistakes on the zipper, accidentally break your needle or anything by going ahead and sewing the backs of the back pieces of the zipper fabric on after sewing the fronts using the exact same stitch line. Now that I've sewn the two pieces of fabric, I have the second piece of fabric sewn on the back, what we want to do is press them both away from the zipper, and like I said when talking about the normal zipper construction, I am sort of just going to finger press them because I don't want to get my iron in that close to the zipper tape, and I'm using a fabric that presses nicely by hand. But again, you can get your iron in there. Just be really careful not to touch the zipper tape. So, okay, that's so. Now we need to trim them down to size. So for like the other zipper tape, we want these to be the same width as our zipper tape. So I'm just gonna eyeball this, but I showed you, how you might chalk this if you don't feel comfortable eyeballing. And then for these, this view, we need to make sure we trim down the length as well. So we need the fabric to extend 3/4 of an inch past that seam line. So here, measure 3/4 of an inch and draw a line of chalk. There, and oops, there we go. That's 3/4 of an inch. So it's a little off on my first one. We'll fix that. 1/8 of an inch in. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and trim both pieces so that they are 3/4 of an inch past, extending past that seam. And here on this end that has the zipper tape, you can see that I actually ended up cutting off a little bit of zipper tape at that. So to make this easier, and we're actually going to be folding these ends in a little bit, what you want to do is go ahead and trim this zipper tape and any of the fabric that's inside of your two pieces. So I'm trimming it to just on the other side of the zipper stop, so that if we look here, that my fabric, if I fold it in, it's not going to be catching on that zipper tape. So here it is trimmed, and now we do need to do one little bit of pressing, and this is where you want to be really careful. Again, that you do not want to ever touch the iron to your zipper tape. And so here on this side, looks like I'm gonna trim this down a tiny bit more, and I want to fold each end in by 1/4 of an inch and press that. So here, see, I have it folded over 1/4 of an inch, and I can check. I have, let's see, a measuring tool where I can accurately measure that 1/4 of an inch and see here that I am indeed folding it over 1/4 of an inch. If this is hard for you to eyeball, you can run a line of stitching at the 1/4 inch mark and then fold exactly on that line of stitching. And then take your iron and just very gently press that bit down. Again, I'm gonna try and hold my zipper tape out of the way so that my zipper isn't being damaged by the heat of the iron. And I'm going to go ahead and repeat that for all 4 ends of this tape. So this is folded, this is folded, this is folded, this is folded, and pressed. And then this zipper tape is ready to go. For the bottom of the pocket, we can start sewing on 1/4 inch seam allowance, right sides together, the 2 bottom pocket pieces. I'm gonna sew down along one outer seam. Across the bottom. And then back up the other side, stopping so that it can leave a roughly 3-inch gap on one side where we're going to turn everything right side out. So I'm going to jump up and then leaving that gap sew straight up to the top. Not sewing the top of the seam or the top of the pocket. So what I have done is sewn down one side, along the bottom, up the other, leaving a 3-inch gap, but then finishing the rest of that side seam by sewing up to the top. Then we can take the zipper that we have already finished the edges of quite nicely, and it should now be the exact perfect length to slide into this top part. The end should butt up perfectly on one end. I want to align the zipper tape and both of the pieces of fabric with on their upper edge here. And the other end should match as well. So it goes in, matches up on that end. So now then we can sort of pin our way on down the rest of this top seam. And then sew this top seam. And to do this, because there is the zipper here, I'm going to switch from my 1/4-inch foot to my zipper foot and sew, roughly a 1/4 inch. Again, this part doesn't matter exactly because the length of our pocket from bottom to top, or I guess the height of our finished pocket, doesn't need to be exact because we have it overhang off the top of the top of the lining of the purse and then trim off the excess. So it doesn't matter if this is exact, what exact seam allowance we pick. So what you might want to do is, I can see here is the zip of the partially zipped zipper, and because I don't want to get a crooked seam when I reach that point, I can actually reach in there and finish zipping up the zipper now past the point that I have already sewn. So reaching in there, and then it's an easy straight shot all the way to the end of the seam. So now I can take this bottom pocket that we have inserted, and I might want to trim fabric off of the corners so that it's easier to get sharp corners when we turn it right side out. But if I trim the fabric off the corners, then I can go through this gap that we left in the side and turn everything right side out. So I'm going to get that turned all the way right side out, and then we can press it flat. So here's the bottom of my pocket, and I've turned it right side out. You might want to use a tool, that you can use to poke into your corners. Don't want to do something too sharp because you don't want to poke through the fabric, but that'll help you get a nice crisp points on your corners. And we want to iron our sides flat. So the way what I like to do to get this seam exactly on the edge of the pocket is kind of roll between my fingers. If you just kind of pinch them and roll, roll back and forth, it wiggles so that the seam ends up on the very edge. I can repeat that with the bottom, get it started, kind of wiggle my way as I go. So it's all flat. And then on this side, where we have that gap, we want to carefully press so that those 1/4 inch bits are pressed in, so that when we go along and top stitch right along here, it's going to cover up that seam and sew that flat. So we don't actually have to do any hand stitching to finish this, but you just want to make sure that as you press that gap, you're pressing the fabric so that it is folded into the inside. And then we can get up here, get close to the zipper, again being careful because you don't want to actually touch the iron to your zipper tape, but we can get close there so we have a nice crisp seam up at the very top. And so now we have this bottom pocket is ready to be sewn to the top part of the pocket. For the top of the pocket, I'm going to use my 1/4 inch foot again. So I can sew a 1/4 inch seam just along both sides of the top of the pocket. With the fabric right sides together. You can use pins to keep this in place if you like sewing with pins. Okay, so that's all the prep work we have to do on this. Now this is ready to be sewn to the zipper that is already attached to the bottom pocket. So we can take the top part of the pocket here where I have sewn just the edges and slide this in to our assembled bottom part of the pocket. And it should fit exactly just like it did before. We can go ahead and pin the seam. Starting so that I have, my zipper's kind of getting in the way, so I'll move it a little bit into the middle, starting on both ends, so I have both ends matched up, and then it should easily pin its way along the width here. And then once I get that pinned and sewn, we can pin it, sew it, turn it right side out and press, and then it will be totally assembled and ready to be sewn into the pocket. So now I have sewn the top of this pocket, sewn the seam to the zipper, can get in and trim off the edges of the corner there, and then turn it right side out and go ahead and press everything flat. Again, being really careful to only get up next to your zipper, never pressing on your zipper tape or your zipper itself. And now this assembled pocket is ready to be top stitched to the pocket lining, just like the basic easy version of the assembled pocket bag. What we can do is take the pocket that we have sewn on, sorry, the lining that we have this small pocket already sewn on, and then place the larger pocket on top according to the placement guidelines. So I have those marked in chalk from when we traced all of our markings on earlier, and get this all on here, and then I can go ahead and pin it in place. I'm gonna pin, pin on the sides, the bottom and the side. You can see that it overhangs the top by quite a bit. Totally fine, that's intentional. That's one of the nice things about this. We don't have to be exactly perfect in our stitching because we will be trimming this to fit. So that's why it doesn't matter, the exact height that we end up with. But I'm going to go ahead and pin this pocket in place, and then we can top stitch or edge stitch very close to the edge all the way along the side, the bottom, and then back up the other side. And then this pocket, all the pockets are ready to go. Now that I have the pocket sewn onto the back lining, the finishing step, you can see we have all this overhang, and we want to be able to trim that off. So I'm going to go ahead and flip it over so I'm sewing from the wrong side, and sew a seam within this 1/2 inch seam allowance, which is the normal seam allowance we use for the construction of most of the bag, aside from the pockets where we've been using the 1/4 inch, but the rest of the bag we use a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I'm gonna sew less than 1/2 inch, following the curve of the top of the back lining. And now that I've done that, it'll keep everything in place, I can go ahead and cut off the rest of this extra pocket top fabric that we no longer need. And so now we have finished. The pocket is fully assembled. We have the inner pocket on the inside, and we are ready to move on with the construction of the rest of the bag.